of the Alliance, Dave Vorland, and we are joined today by Dr. Will Roper. Before I get to his introduction, I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us so far. And I also want to just give a kind of brief overview of who we are as the Alliance, what we're trying to accomplish, why our organization exists, and then we can go from there into Dr. Roper, the reason that all of you are joining, and so that we can get a good sense of what he's learned from his time in government and kind of being a leader in this innovation space and making us move forward. So just really quickly, I'll talk about my background and how I got here. So I spent 8 years at the Pentagon doing, initially starting out in missile defense technology, missile defense policy, which is where I first encountered Dr. Roper when he was a kind of lead architect for the Missile Defense Agency. And my bosses in policy, specifically Dr. Miller, would ask these kind of tough technical questions of the head of the Missile Defense Agency, at that time, General O'Reilly. And General O'Reilly would turn to Dr. Roper to explain, all the intricate details of how all of our missile defense systems and architecture work together. And Dr. Roper is able to explain it that even those of us in policy were able to understand. And so, yeah, it's over a decade now of me getting good, concise, clear explanations of difficult high technology issues from Dr. Roper. So that will continue today. But from there, where I went in policy was into an area that dealt a lot closer with budget and where we headed with these kind of strategy decisions that inform the budget. And one of the things that we worked on was called the third offset strategy. And these offset strategies are the things that kind of leap aheads in technology that would make the United States have a strategic advantage over our adversaries in the long term. And so the third offset strategy, what boiled down to largely was kind of our high technology sector paired with our highly trained military, volunteer military, would be able to provide this advantage as long as we could get the best technology in the hands of those warfighters and those people dedicated to keeping us safe. And so out of this effort, you saw things like Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, now just called Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, and also the Strategic Capabilities Office. And when they were looking for someone to stand up that office and be the initial director, they found Dr. Will Roper, our guest tonight, who really kind of took that innovation challenge, that kind of really the strategic challenge of the Department of Defense to say that, how are we going to stay ahead of our adversaries in the medium to long term and put it in his hands. And so it was no small feat. And from there, he went on to lead the Acquisition and Technology and Logistics Office for the Air Force, where he took that same innovation mindset and was able to do some kind of revolutionary things. So that's kind of how I came to this space, was through that, third offset strategy. How do we kind of move ahead in kind of military advantage? And from there, I gained an interest in kind of the high technology space generally, and how we can make government work better through government interventions, and by getting the best technology in the hands of those people that can actually do the work on the ground. And as we've seen with basically the entire government, along with most of our private sector, doing everything virtually. And, as we've tried to do, massive vaccine rollouts and signups and all these things, we see just how critical it is that our government is able to function well, utilizing the best technologies that are available in the private and commercial sectors. So yeah, to the Alliance, our mission is very simple. It boils down to one sentence: is to improve how government leverages commercial technologies to accelerate products and enhance progress and enhance citizens' well-being. So that really is the point of what we're trying to do. As citizens, as taxpayers, as a government, we should be able to have access to the best technology. We should be able to use that technology to make people's lives better. And what we're trying to do is break down the barriers to making that happen. And so yeah, just a little bit about who we are. We're an advocacy organization. We're a lobbying organization. We will be using all the advocacy tools and pressure that we can bring to bear to make sure that government is considering commercial off-the-shelf technology first, that we are able to capture the innovation and research and development that is happening in our really innovative commercial technology sector right now, and make sure that it is available to those charged with, serving the American people. Our key policy priorities, which I'll just touch on briefly, we're focused on kind of getting increased funds into government, incentivizing that requirement for off-shelf acquisition, as I was talking about, the SBIR program, which will be part of our conversation with Dr. Roper today, and then security clearance and compliance and the barriers that are faced around that issue for companies that are trying to work with government for the first time. So with that, I will introduce our guest, or further introduce our guest today. He's been on the forefront of dealing with government innovation and trying to lead the charge on kind of making sure that we have the best technology available to government. One of his great successes, I would say, is with the SBIR program and how the Air Force is able to use that to get good commercial technology kind of through to program of record and really make it successful for the Air Force, as opposed to these kind of research projects or what we'll term cyber mills, which I'll ask Dr. Roper to talk about a little bit as we go forward. So with that, Will, thank you for joining us for our kickoff event. I really appreciate it. And I know that the guests that we have on the line appreciate it. And so with that, I would just, as my first question, and I want to keep this relatively informal and get some information from our guests as well, so people can drop questions into the Q&A, and I'll try to get to as many as I can. But the first question that I wanted to ask you is just if you could talk briefly about some of the barriers that you faced in both your role as when you're director of SCO and then also in the Air Force. What did you see as the barriers to the kind of companies that we're talking about, these startups and scale-ups that have some commercial investment, some private sector, products that are doing a good job? Where's the challenge in kind of getting them to that kind of dual use and into the government space?
Well, we only have a little bit of time for this. This is a long answered question. All the barriers would take a long fireside chat indeed. We'd need lots of logs for that fire. But in brief, there was a cultural issue when I entered the Air Force. Small business equaled small impact in many people's minds. So it's not worth our time as senior procurement or acquisition officials to get out and work with companies that have less than 50 people. And that was actually was not as hard to change once we started standing up AFWorks and doing pitch days and getting leaders out of their offices, out from behind fence lines and sitting across from companies, from founders, from CTOs that could do things at radically different paces and at radically lower cost, and started changing the mindset within acquisition of what is possible. The other thing that I saw, there's always not enough money, right? And two, the money is booked 2 years in advance, which makes zero sense for working with early stage companies. And that's an area that we really do need change. We're not going to be able to unlock the full potential of what the startup community can do if we continue to budget 2 years ahead of spending that dollar. So that means everyone who was putting money on the table to work with companies was having to take it out of hide and bleed a little bit in their programs. So a critical thing we did to make bleeding more tolerable was do the matching awards in AFWorks, where you would match a program office dollar with an SBIR dollar, and then with multiples from private investors. And the purchasing power went way up. And that meant there was a reason, there was an incentive for program offices to reach into their pockets, reach into their manager reserves, and to spend money that had been booked earlier, but that made sense to spend with companies. And the other thing I think is a huge impediment, and it's something also that can't be changed unless the laws change, is the color of money impediment. That a lot of companies were bringing something as a service but they needed a little more research and development to be able to sell to the government. But the customer they were working with did not have that color of money. And in the private sector, there isn't any color of money. It's all green, right? It's just one color of money. In the government, there are however many, I don't remember. But if you're working with a customer that has the need, the desire, and the funding, but colored the wrong way, then they can't be a customer. And that is going to be a huge challenge for companies that need to sell things as a service, but they need to do R&D first, or they need someone to procure their system, but they're working with an organization that doesn't do procurement. These are the invisible barriers that if you don't understand government, it can look like you've got a great product market fit. And I could tell you in a second that you don't. And so that I thought was a huge challenge that really needs help on. So I would say the big impediments are the funding 2 years ahead of need, color of money issues, and then you hit the nail on the head. Security clearances and accreditations are a big deal. And if you didn't have them in mind when you started developing your product, it's often very difficult and expensive to put them in after the fact. Another area where I think the government can take more risk on security for the speed and agility that it will afford them.
Great. Well, thank you. And I do want to mention just kind of the mix of people that we have on this call. We have some members, some prospective members, potentially some members of the media. And then we also have a large number of people from the Hill and people who are working in this from the legislative branch side. So you mentioned, change the laws. And so I think that is an important point, and a reason why our organization exists is that in some cases, the government has all the authority they need, or all the authority they need if they're willing to take some risk. And in other cases, we really do have to change laws, regulations, and authorities so that Congress is dictating that things have to happen a certain way to get what we need. What advice, I guess, would you give to the Hill staffer, the person who is engaged in this when they're going to their leadership, when they're going to their committee leadership, their member, where can they bring pressure to bear to make this kind of innovation community within government able to be successful?
It's a great question. And I always found members of Congress and staffers were always willing to work on things that made the military more competitive against key adversaries like China and Russia, and being able to unlock the full potential of our nation's tech ecosystem is the only way we're going to be able to win this competition and compete against adversaries that are bigger than we are. I mean, 80% of the R&D in our nation is commercial. That's where the military's opportunity space is. So although this is called innovation, it is literally imperative for the future of our military and the future of our country. So that's first thing is, right, we've got to own this as this is a national crisis, that there is a .com market that has separated and is increasingly separating from the .mil market. But they could work in synergy the way that we've seen with AFWERX. Now, the second thing, we've got a Cold War era procurement system that we've been handed, and it doesn't make any sense in the 21st century when we compete against adversaries that are not economically isolated from us and where tech is globalized. So there are a lot of things that could be done to make the procurement system more competitive. But in the case of commercial companies, especially high growth companies, there really need to be different rules for working with early stage companies that you would not use for a defense prime or building a bomber, but that would be acceptable risk for working at small dollars. And I'll give some ideas of what I think would be helpful, but at a macro level, I want the government to be able to act like an investor, to be able to have a process that allows it to mirror the best practices of Silicon Valley and other amazing investment areas of the country. So the first thing, being able to have funding that is available outside of the 2-year forecast would be helpful. There are a variety of ways this could be done. It could be done by having an account that is authorized and appropriated to work just with small businesses, and notice is given to Congress in the year of execution. Here's how we're going to do it. So there's still the ability to authorize and oversee and control, but it'd be Congress forecasting there will be a need to have funding to work with companies that may not even exist today, but will want to be connected with the military in the future. You could also solve that problem by allowing the military to reprogram money across different divides. There's expiring funds every year, usually a couple of $1 billion that it's very difficult to spend at the end of the fiscal year, because you have to have reserve in the military. You can't, you may have to go to war at the end of the fiscal year. So you have to have reserve as the fiscal year ends, you spend. The ability to refresh that funding, to reprogram it, could be helpful, or to have expiring funds that don't expire if you're working with a small company. Things like that that just create a bumper crop of cash that can be there, so that you're not having to pull money out of large programs of record. A variety of mechanisms to do that. Whichever one is the easiest can be done. Second, the color of money divide is a big deal, especially for people that have a procurement type program, but they're working with someone that only does service contracts paid for out of O&M, or the other way around. So I really wish you were allowed to move money across the different colors of money, and it would obey a different rule if you were working with small businesses, commercial companies, as opposed to normal defense procurement. And finally, and this is a big deal, and this was a fight in the Air Force, we need to be able to do larger awards in SBIR. And we were able to do that with the StratFi program, but every one of those has to be a unique waiver done by contract award. And they're out of the military's control. We had to go work with the Small Business Administration, and there were some people who really wanted to do something provocative and disruptive. And so thankfully, we were able to get those waivers done. But being dependent on a waiver process is not a great idea, because it can change. Personalities can change. Risk tolerance can change. And without those larger awards, you're not really at the table when private investors are there. You want to be there at a Series A or Series B, but the StratFi program was the only way we could get enough cash together, non-dilutive cash, by the way, so that it was very appealing and we could be part of a company's calculus. You take the cap off of the pyramid, the base, even though it's wider, isn't tall enough to really help companies get their product done. So those are a few ideas that could be helpful, that would make the way the government works a lot more like Silicon Valley. Cash that forecasts that there will be a need, there will be opportunity, getting rid of the color of money divide, just like there's not color of money in commercial markets, and having an investment structure that mirrors the way that, seed, Series A, B, C work in private investment. If you just copycat what works so well for the private sector, it's likely to work a lot better than what the government does today.
Yeah, I think we could have an entire conversation about those kind of multiplier things that government can do to kind of take a small amount of investment to really multiply the private sector investment. I think the StratFi program is a good one. Do you think there are other good examples of how, kind of recognizing that the shift has happened, that most of this investment, the initial investment, is happening in the private sector? Are there ways that the government can signal or put their money in alongside private funding in a way that is more beneficial, or that's happening now, or that there's kind of a best case example that should happen across more of government?
Yeah, I think the trend that was happening, but could be more formal, is that we were tipping the scales on areas of deep tech. So within the 80% of the R&D in the nation that's commercial, about 80% of that is in de-risked software-based technologies. And you can understand why. You get the return on investment quicker. Well, a lot of what the military needs will be in the deep tech category, hardware focused. And although we could invest in companies that are software based, our dollars are fewer drops in that bucket, right? That is already big. But in an area of deep tech, because we're a patient investor, we can wait for those returns. We are not taking equity. So as an investment partner with a private firm, we're a preferred customer, and that we're also a market in that we purchase things, we certify things. I think that the military should look for areas of partnership and areas of deep tech and try to level the playing field so that founders in future, if you happen to have a deep tech idea, you don't feel like you're on an uneven playing field. And going back to competing against China, if we're mirroring that kind of investment strategy in China, then we're likely to lose just because of the scale of capital that they'll bring. We should be making more deep tech investments as a nation to continue to disrupt the tech markets, not just looking for leap aheads, but looking for revolutions, new industrial revolution enabling technology. And if we're not making those investments to keep disrupting markets, then we'll be defeated in existing markets via scale. The military can play a huge catalytic role because it brings over $55 billion of non-dilutive cash to put into those areas of tech. And if it did so with a sense of strategy, similar to what we were doing with quantum pitch days when I left, we wanted to target that as a sector year after year so that quantum companies got an advantage, not just with the military, but in being able to raise funds in their private rounds. And I hope that's something that will continue.
Right. Okay. Well, I think I could take the entire session just asking my questions, but again, I do want to encourage people to use the Q&A function on the Zoom call, the webinar, to ask their questions as well. We'll get to as many of them as we can. But before we turn there, I did want to ask you, this is a little bit outside of our kind of DoD lane, but the Technology Modernization Fund is something that the government has recently increased funding, and I believe the CARES Act and the Biden administration has talked about increasing it even more. But this is a program where the government can do some of these kind of investments in IT modernization and technology investments, but they have to show a return. I guess as we're looking at this and other kind of investments like that, are there ways that government can design the contract awards or design pitches or something like that so that this goes beyond the kind of normal defense, and well, not defense in this case, but government contractor base that has set itself up to kind of always win these awards, kind of understand how to read an RFI and an RFP? Is there a way to make this a lot more accessible to these kind of innovative commercial technologies?
There is, and this is an area where technology itself is creating new technology opportunities. And the thing that I viewed are major defense programs like the B-21 bomber or ground-based strategic deterrence. So the latter is like a $60 billion program. It could be a whole ecosystem for innovation by itself. And although you might look at it and think, well, it's a nuclear weapons program, how much innovation can really take place there? It can take place everywhere. It's got a huge facilities problem. It's got logistics challenges. It's got safety challenges. It's got networking challenges. It has challenges that cut across so many areas of tech. But the way that we approach those types of programs is kind of a winner take all, and then the winner determines the team of companies that have access to that ecosystem. And that team is assembled before the contract is awarded. And that's how the government has been accustomed to doing business. Well, technologies like model-based system engineering or digital engineering, cloud and modern software practices like Kubernetes, which allow you to have a lot of different users developing things that can still work together in a way that's not going to create safety issues. These are technologies that are allowing you to flatten and to break up these locked teaming relationships if the acquisition strategy changes to require them. And what I would hope would happen in future, although there will be a prime integrator, if we mandate the use of these enabling technologies and open standards by which you connect to those systems, then parts of the systems can stay open as a continually recompeting ecosystem and opportunity for companies to come in. So right now, we're just talking about SBIR, getting to phase 3 across the Valley of Death. Imagine if crossing the Valley of Death could be done in every ACAT 1A program in the government. it should be an opportunity. And I think if we continue to push these enabling technologies, push digital engineering, agile software, and open architecture and standards, more and more program opportunities are going to open up to commercial companies that couldn't build the nuclear weapon system or the bomber or the satellite, but they can put a very important component in it at a better performance and a better price.
Yeah, that you're hitting right at where we see a challenge that we can address through the alliance, right? I mean, the type of contracts that may serve the largest defense contractors and largest government contractors very well by saying, you know, let's just put it all in the one multi-billion-dollar, multi-year award contract. And then, you know, you can only participate as a sub, and, you know, with all the restrictions that come with subs, we've got to break that system down. And that's something that we'll be engaged in as an organization.
Well, and remember, you know, to be fair to the past, because we have the benefit of hindsight in this. There once was a time where acquisition programs blew up because integration risk was underappreciated, right? The government will be the integrator. Kaboom, right? So that's why concurrency is effectively a 4-letter word in acquisition. And what we're saying now, and by the way, and because of that, it was better practice to put the integration in the hands of industry so that all of the details were in one organization that was responsible for them. Well, now modern design tools allow concurrency to actually be your friend. You can manage it in a software way, in a virtualized way. And that allows you to effectively flatten, to not have these nesting subsystem integrated in a subsystem integrated in the system, and having to have all of that happen in series. You can allow that to occur in parallel. You can allow companies to work more independently inside of a larger macro system without increasing the risk of that integration. It is the lowering of integration risk that we will have to say 1,000 times. Digital engineering makes integration risk go down to a tolerable volume level if it's done right. And that turns platforms into ecosystems. If we allow acquisitions to continue making fully vertically integrated platforms, there will be very little opportunity for commercial companies to play in them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, kind of underappreciated, I think, shift that we've seen. So I appreciate that. So with that, I do want to start to turn to some of the questions that we've received from our members and people who are on this call, so I don't dominate the conversation the entire time. First one is one that I received ahead of time from Roman Sandoval. This is one of our member companies, AlloSense. And his question is more maybe specific to you and your time as you've shifted out of government. He said, congratulations on joining the board of directors of various kind of defense related businesses. And he says, are there particular metrics or qualifications that you use when determining when to join a company? And what's your long-term strategy for kind of personal and business growth? And I think this could be relevant because, you know, some of our companies and you know, people on the call and members are looking at, as they kind of enter the DoD ecosystem or the government ecosystem more generally, how do you leverage people who have the kind of experience that you've had inside of government? So I think it's a really fascinating question and a personal one as well.
Sure, and I don't mind sharing it all. And you know, I've been in government for 10 years, had a blast doing it. But you know, in government, you have to work with all companies the same way, be exceptionally fair, operate under the highest appearance standards, and you should, right? We have significant taxpayer dollars and trust, and that is something I took very seriously. But now that I've departed the government, you know, I can't work with every company anymore. I can't change the process anymore that helps every company. So the thing I can do to continue this fight is to help a handful of companies that I have enough bandwidth to do. And so I have joined the boards of a few companies that I think I can particularly help. You know, the background I have allows me to help them both on the government side, but also on the technology side. And that's what I really enjoy doing, is when I can use both sides of the equation. And, you know, there are a couple of things that you can be thinking of as a company of whether someone would be beneficial to have on a board or as an advisor. But you should really look at, are they really going to help you find your product market fit? And are they going to help you get your product in its best shape to cross the valley of death? And just because they're a big name and recognized, it's probably not going to help you. So really taking a clear-eyed view about, is the knowledge that someone has, is it really going to be value added? And what'll be really cool is more people, like in the Air Force and other places, will have their government experience be working with commercial companies and helping them succeed. More people should be leaving government in future that do have that knowledge to help you, and you should view them really strategically, and if you can get them to advise you in some capacity, I think it just gives you the confidence as a company that you're making your investments the right way. You've got the right strategy, the right game plan. If you've only got 2 bites at the apple, you're taking the right 2 bites in the right 2 locations. And that's what I think good advisors and good board members do. They really take the C-suite, they take its worry off, that they're not worried about intangibles or strategies or things that are at this bigger universe than they understand. You take that worry away so that the CEO knows they have the right strategy, the right customer, and they just need to go be excellent in executing. And when you can do that, it's a win for everyone involved.
Great. Excellent. Thanks. I do want to turn to a question now from Edward Hood, the founder of Mass Address Incorporated. And he says, how does a company tell the DoD, and I'll expand this out and say, how does a company tell the government they developed a solution to a problem that they don't know that they have? And I'll kick this off by saying, join the Alliance for Commercial Technology and Government. As part of what we're going to do is exactly that. We're going to take the issues that our companies face and the tech solutions that exist and say, to Congress in op-eds, every time we see, a unique program go on and say, hey, we have to build this exact technology that meets exactly these requirements, when there's a commercial technology that already exists that's sitting on the shelf. Highlighting those issues is exactly what we're going to do as an organization. So beyond joining the Alliance, Dr. Roper, what do you think that these companies can do to kind of highlight their solutions where government may not recognize that they have a problem?
Yeah, well placed there, Dave. Not your first rodeo. And it will help. I mean, having organizations that understand the government, understand who to talk to, that can open doors, is something that most of the major defense companies have. And so this will start leveling the playing field for commercial companies that either aren't big enough to typically have that support, or that just don't have the background to have it. One thing I highly encourage you to look for and to also advocate for in the Alliance are open topic solicitations, which were a big thing that we championed in the Air Force and AFWorks, which was just fantastic to watch us go from these very narrow solicitations where, as you articulate, the government presumed it knew its problems and solutions, and that basically said, come tell us what you're doing. Bring us opportunities or bring us challenges that we don't know we have, but that can be solved by things that you have. Why wouldn't every solution, every solicitation be open? And that's what we pivoted to. Right? We would have a solicitation. We'd say, we have these problems. We're interested in your solution, but it's an open solicitation. You can come tell us anything you're working on. And those often got some crazy, amazing ideas into our shopping carts and became the things we were most excited about. I view open topics are the way to go on any solicitation for small business, and maybe why not solicitations in general, that you could have components that could be open. So the government isn't just operating based on requirements, it's operating based on opportunities too.
Great. Well, thank you. That's a great answer. So an additional question here. Sorry, these are going to jump around a little bit as I'm just trying to get through the questions that people on the call have. So appreciate you, Will, hanging with us as we bounce around the kind of innovation ecosphere here. Rapid Innovation Fund was implemented for SBIRs and then eventually phased out. when kind of programming funding returns. So that this doesn't kind of get to a question exactly, but so I guess the question is, what should the future of things like the Rapid Innovation Fund be? I mean, you talked a little bit about color money, but are there reforms that need to happen even with how the SBIR program is being used by the Air Force? And kind of what were your lessons learned with the SBIR program that could maybe touch on this issue?
Yeah, so the Rapid Innovation Fund is one of many funds that have been stood up to try to solve the problem I mentioned, which is money needs to be in place ahead of the knowledge of the very specific need for which it will be spent, because so much of our opportunity is coming from commercial technology that moves at a pace where 2 years is an infinitude, where the company may not even exist when the budget's submitted, but could bring an amazing solution and that could make a difference. But here's the thing, whenever the government or say the military asks for that, it's a big ask for Congress. You are asking for Congress, whose job it is to authorize and appropriate the budget, to authorize and appropriate funding that it doesn't know what it's for. And if the answer is innovation, that trick's been tried many times. So what I was in favor of was something similar to a pretty obscure program that's not obscure for the combatant commands called the Joint Capability Technology Demonstration Program, JCTD. This is for combatant commands that are the warfighter to be able to do tech demonstrations in their exercises. But because those change and are planned all the way up to the time the demonstration takes place, when the budget's submitted, you don't know what the exercise is going to be. Sometimes you don't even know what nations are going to be participating. So the way this program is operated is Congress authorized and appropriated money, but the department had to submit what it actually did in the year of execution, and Congress got to say, A or nay. So it still had the ability to oversee that funding, but it put it in place ahead of the budget cycle that would normally ask for it. And I thought that program worked really well. It wasn't big, maybe 80 to 100 million, but it allowed the combatant commands to use the latest technology in their demonstration in a way that Congress felt comfortable. And I think that's a great model to explore with members of Congress. Could we make something like that, where there's an innovation account that's put in place, but you can't spend it unless Congress approves your actual individual expenses in the year of execution? And if something like that worked, then you get the benefit of forecasting that there will be opportunities, but also ensuring that there would be oversight that that many diligent people would expect to be in place. And I would actually prefer it to be in place, because without it, the first time someone misuses an account like that, it'll go away and dry up like so many have before it. So it needs to be properly balanced. And I think the suggestion of modeling after the JCTD account is one worth considering.
That's great. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so next question here. We've got one about the role that incubators and accelerators can play in government transformation. Where do you think they use the most value? Where did you see value in kind of working with them? I know that there is kind of a fairly large community now of these companies that are dedicated to kind of getting the best technology into government from the accelerator side. We're definitely doing it from the advocacy side. Is there a key role where you see they could add value that would kind of go beyond the relationship between companies and government officials themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of our foray into this world was Warren Katz and Techstars doing an accelerator that was targeting Air Force missions, right? So what I think—
this question came from Stephanie Chin, not Warren Katz, board member of the Alliance. I will add that as a caveat, but I think it's relevant to many of our.
Yeah, but it's an example. So I got to work with Warren and some amazing Air Force captains, and watch companies go through the accelerator on their path coming into defense. I think there are a couple of roles that they can play. One, they can help founders and their emerging companies become good companies. And first and foremost, you need to be a good company if you're going to make it into defense, which is an amazing market because it's delineated in many ways, right? It puts non-dilutive cash into companies. You can enter it at a higher price point, at a higher risk. It does its own regulation. It certifies things for use. So for many companies, the military market should be its easiest first entry if you get through all of that government morass. The downside is that, it does take some specialized expertise to understand how to navigate the morass. So I think if accelerators continue the job they do in ensuring companies become good companies with good strategies as they grow, and they get more defense expertise so that they can help them look at product market fit in the military and understand where the pitfalls are, working with organizations like AFWorks, that companies will eventually emerge out of accelerators, and that they will have a strategy for the .mil market and the .com market and understand how they should interplay. I really think the two markets can work together in synergy. Right now, we're divided and conquered. But if the military market can accept earlier entries, if you get all that government morass out of the way, then really you could de-risk a lot of technology in the military market before it commercialized. And that could be the equation that helps us compete in this century. We're going to have two markets that work together in symbiosis. And markets are wonderful at keeping innovation fresh. And that could be a way to beat centralized governments that are fusing their military and their civilian functions into one thing, but that have the control of centralization that doesn't really allow the wonderful market dynamics that keep innovation fresh. So there's a chance for a wonderful future, and accelerators can play a role in it. But the thing we really want to attack first is getting that morass, that like there be dragons part of the map that many companies feel like. There's the government, but I have no idea how to get in. It should be easy to get in if you're a great company with great tech.
Right. Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, Warren, one of the founding kind of board members of this organization, I said that my goal would be to basically put them out of business by making it so easy for commercial technology to work with government that there's no need for accelerators. But I think the reality is that, or at least make them change their business model. But the reality is that there's a lot of work that they can do, and that it can be very good work in helping these companies.
They'll still, once it's easy to work with the government, then it becomes a highly competitive space, and accelerators will delineate themselves on how good they are at helping companies excel in that space. So their role will just change when it's not obscure knowledge written on rare scrolls rocked in the dungeons of the five-sided building, but it feels just like you're pitching to any other investor.
Right. And I think that's similar, and I think you probably argued the same thing, right? It's the same with the technologies. If we make it easy for all the technologies to get in, that's when you can really see the best technology rise to the fore and kind of win contracts and get in the hands of our military. But if you create so many roadblocks in the system that, it's the way that the technology gets through is by being best at navigating this esoteric system. You haven't even gotten to the question of whether the technology is good. And so, our organizational mission here is to make it so that not that we're picking the best technology, but that we're making it easy for all the technologies to get through. So, very important point there about what we're trying to accomplish. Here's a question that I'm going to modify slightly. It's a question about drones, and I'm happy to have you talk about drones and where you think we should be going in the drone space. The way they framed it is interesting. It says, with regards to competing with China in the drone space, what's most important? Autonomy, increased agility and control, payload delivery, batteries, etc. So feel free to answer the question about drones, but I also would like to broaden it out and have you talk just a little bit about China. Where are our opportunities? Where do you think we should be viewing them kind of as the enemy? Where do you think that we should be viewing them as competition? Where can we view them as a partner? How does this matter in terms of investment capital? If you could just talk a little bit about our relationship with China, I think that'd be really interesting to our organization.
Sure. I'll talk China first because I'll pivot into where you might want to go with drones if you believe the theory. So, I've been watching China for many years, as have many others. And right now, they're certainly, they're centralizing with a lot of control in unprecedented many cases under President Xi, and this civilian military fused approach to national power, both economic and military power. And it's possible that there could be a future where the US and China work together in a way that does not feel like a return to a Cold War, but feels more like a strategic partnership instead of great power competition, great power cooperation. And the two nations could solve nearly any technical challenge faced by the world. But there are two different, very different ideologies. And right now that future doesn't appear to be very likely, and that's unfortunate, but we should hope for it and keep all the diplomatic outreach engagement so that we can hope for something that right now we don't think is likely. If it's not likely, I don't move to that other end, that we're going to be bitter enemies and that a war is a fait accompli. We're more likely to be competitors in almost all things, but technology and markets being one of the first and more forefront battlefields, which is why I was very ardent about proselytizing that technology markets are a battlefield in and of themselves for the military, even if there's no military requirement or mission that we can see in them yet. Because if we're passive on them and we allow them to emerge without our support, we can easily see them move under commercial market forces that do not help national security ultimately. And if there's a requirement in future for something you didn't know to require today, now there's no industrial base or market to provide it. And if you think that sounds too hypothetical or worst case, that is exactly what happened with hobbyist drones. They emerged in this nation, and now it's difficult to buy any drone that's not made in China. DJI has taken over the market, and I had to sign off on all of those drones that were used in any kind of experiment or demonstration. They have caused a security threat. That is what not treating emerging tech markets as a battlefield will be. I think that is likely to be our next foreseeable future, is competing against China in emerging tech markets, trying to accelerate those markets the fastest. Whoever does will have the advantage of them, both economically and militarily. They'll have the upside on economically, but then they'll be able to build a better military with it. And that the balance of those things will be an engine that drives economic advantage and ultimately military power. And so that's how we engage in the competition. There are a lot of areas that we should not let go by. AI is one of them. Quantum is one of them. Hypersonics is one of them. And autonomy is one of them. And where I would recommend that the nation really compete, which is the next emerging field, is in autonomous logistics, which I think is coming. I think we engage very heavily in electric vertical takeoff and landing technology, which we thought the Air Force would need to help certify as safe to fly, created the Agility Prime program, and now look what's happened to the eVTOL market, right? It's now commercializing with a lot of energy behind it. And all the things you can do in eVTOL, I really think logistics is the most interesting first. Greater flexibility, greater speeds. And where you can get the logistics solutions to be completely autonomous, you're really going to drop the overhead that's required. So I would really like to see the nation be able to win that race, be able to make eVTOL something that emerges here, have logistics and freight with it, have people movers with it, and just really change the way that transportation works. So what do we need to invest in to get there? We need safety. We need infrastructure for charging. If we're going to fly these things and they're electric, and there are lots of great carbon neutral benefits from that, but we've got to have the infrastructure to do it. Range will matter, range and performance. I think that is going to be more important than just building a better camera drone or something that can only fly a few kilometers. I think we're looking for systems that can fly 100 miles or more, and that can change the nature of logistics in this nation, and in a way, really allow economic growth in the center of the country where distances are greater. Imagine if you could effectively shrink those distances through greater speed and agility of moving people and equipment around. We might be able to have a growth, a revolution, where we see a lot of technology that's not growing on the east and west coast, but growing in the center of the nation too. So it could have this wonderful effect on the economy. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe none of this will happen. Maybe it's not the next tech market that's going to change the world. but it's too big of a risk not to engage. Like, no, are we gonna be so naive to say it's not? It's just too urgent. And so we should just treat them like they're a battlefield. We give them a named operation in the Pentagon and go fight like hell and win the war.
As someone from a very small town in rural Iowa, I appreciate your directing some economic growth engine to the kind of middle of the country as we think about where we should go next.
And that's another area of deep tech, right? eVTOL, deep tech, difficult to get electric vertical takeoff and landing. So these are not airplanes, they're not helicopters, they're not like anything that flies. Difficult to certify domestically. The Air Force was able to certify them in a year, and now the domestic market is emerging. That's what this technology as a battlefield should feel like. And there was no requirement for these systems when we created the program. I got a lot of funny looks, like, why? Well, why? Because this is something new and it's going to likely change the world. Why are we not engaging as an Air Force with amazing things that fly? Or this should not be a novel idea that we want to be where innovation is happening. And the ramifications of not being there, you can see in the DJI. It's a cautionary tale for what passivity can do to a nation that lets technology markets evolve without a strategy for them.
So I really appreciate that. And I want to build on that with my last question. And I think we're going to have to make it the last question so that we can wrap up on time. And I want to be respectful of your time, and those of the people on the call. But you mentioned, there was a requirement in I think we've benefited tremendously, and the Air Force has benefited tremendously from having you in that position as a kind of visionary and a person who could really do an incredible amount to see what was coming. But promotion in the military, especially, I think it tends to be a risk-averse kind of endeavor. And so how do we get top brass and how do we get kind of leading acquisition professionals here? Is it training? Is it making risk acceptance or intelligent risk acceptance a criteria for advancement? What can we do to be more successful in kind of seeing the future, seeing where we should go, and making some of these calculated risks on behalf of the country?
That's a difficult question too, because it's one thing to say we need to take risk. It's another thing to do it. Washington does not reward risk typically. And let's face it, if risk I had taken early in my career had not happened to come up in my favor, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. I wouldn't have gotten a chance to take on greater responsibility. But whether or not they were good bets to make was a function of the risk reward calculus. It's like if I took you to Vegas and said, I've got a slot machine where you've got a 70% chance of winning, no one would fault you for playing. That's great odds, right? But it's a function of the odds, not a function of the role. And I think that's something that we can do in acquisition. We can start rating people, evaluating them before they've actually rolled the outcome. We evaluate them when they take the risk itself. I think that could start changing the culture. And then whether or not you roll the 70% or otherwise, it's just a matter of function of odds. And we could look at how is the total return across portfolios doing? Two, we need to promote people that take good risks and they don't come out. So there need to be leaders who make it, who are not just the scions of success. And everyone has to be part of that, not just the military, but Congress as well. And then the most important thing is culture, 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 which is not the way the government operates. It operates based on process and organization. Something's wrong, we need a new organization, and where there's a box that fixes the problem we have, and then we have a process that's run inside of that box. And that is a phony approach to leadership, and it doesn't solve anything. It only solves it on paper, literally. Culture is what solves most problems, and it's hard to build, but the military can, because we've got a mission statement and people that any commercial company would kill for. right? Keeping the nation safe, keeping prosperity intact with amazing people to do it. So we don't have to create a mission statement to make people feel like they're part of something that's greater than themselves. We have it in spades. What's missing is inside of that empowerment. And that was a lot of what I did in the Air Force, was empower people to go do things and hopefully, I think, convince them that I would give them the top cover even if they made mistakes, as long as they didn't have ethical or moral poor judgment, that I would give them top cover. And it took a while, but I think once people started believing in that, they started doing amazing things. And that's not, it sounds great, but I'll tell you this, not everything went great, folks. And when you have to go walk and see like the DepSecDef or a senior leader and explain why something that happened is that people aren't happy about, you've got to be willing to take it square in the chest. And that's a really personal decision that could not go your way in government. We need leaders who are willing to take one in the chest for their people, and people will go move mountains. And I think finally, and this is something I learned in the Air Force, is that most people in the military are exceptional fast followers. I didn't find a ton of entrepreneurs, and the ones I found, you unleash them and they go create a lot of sparks. But in creating innovation, things like the pitch days or the software factories or these digital programs or accelerated templates for acquisition, it was really creating a model that could be replicated. And I would put a lot of time into the first one, and I would say, and that's the way we ought to do it, and here's why. And then the team would say, you're exactly right. And they would just clone everywhere. I only really did the first pitch day personally, and then they started happening everywhere. Kessel Run was one I had to decide early, is this something we're really going to do and make a program, an ACAT-1 program? Yes, we did. Now there's software factories everywhere. And so I think that's just a function. Military is meant to keep its ability to win wars today, maintain continuity of operations. It's always going to have a lot of people who are exceptional at being able to sustain the readiness that was handed to them. They're going to hand it off to their successors. And what we need to have alongside that important skill set is a place to grow disruptors where they can make it into leadership. And I don't know the right balance of sustainers versus disruptors. You don't want to go too far either side, but I think ultimately that's how you net assess the whole problem, is when I've got the culture that espouses entrepreneurship and innovation and disruption, I'm giving it top cover when it makes mistakes, as long as they're not moral or ethical ones. Then I'm ensuring that people can make it and be promoted. Then the final thing is, what's the right balance of disruptors versus operators, and what is the most optimal competitive Air Force? I don't know the answer to the latter. I was really just working on the former. But what I would say was awesome, the Air Force and Space Force really hit it out of the park. They wanted to change. They did change, not just at the grassroots level, all the way up into senior leadership. And I watched it go from being an organization that really viewed itself as like the custodian of fighters to an organization that loved innovation above all else. And that was its roots. And if it stays there, it is going to be in a great place for its future. I think every organization can adopt that template. Don't hold on to anything. Let the thing you have go today, and industry is going to bring you more amazing things in the future. And my hope for the companies on and watching, that you'll be part of those amazing things. And my hope for the Alliance is that you'll continue to get the door open wider and wider, so that working with the military becomes a no-brainer for anyone starting what will hopefully be a world-leading company in future. I hope everyone says, we got our start working with the military, and it's a core part of our origin story and identity.
Excellent. Well, that's a great way to wrap our first event as the Alliance for Commercial Technology and Government. Thank you, Dr. Will Roper, for joining us and providing your insights and explanations. And you mentioned in your last comments there you enjoy watching. We all know that you weren't watching; you were leading the change within the Air Force, and we look forward to you continuing to be a leader in all the roles that you take on going from here. But we appreciate you sharing your insight and expertise with us. And I'd like to thank everyone who joined us for this session. Hopefully that you gained something useful from it, so you can take it back to your companies, you can take it back to your place in Congress or government, or the place where you're writing about this stuff. And you can use some of these insights as you think about how we bring change to government and make government work better. So with that, thank you again, Will. Really appreciate your time. And with that, thank you very much. And please follow the Alliance, keep an eye on us as we go forward, and try to make government better for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.